Good morning, boys and girls. Happy Thursday. Thank you for joining me for our fourth online math lesson. I've been watching you guys turn in your work online, and everything is looking really great. So I'm really proud of the effort that you've put in so far. We have a few more days of learning in this way, so keep up the good work and keep turning everything in. All right, so we are going to jump right into our lesson today. So we're on lesson 4, and this week we've been learning all about fractions. So I'm just going to jump up to the top of our math wall, and we're going to go over our objective. So our objective for today is we'll practice explaining what equivalent fractions are, and we'll practice identifying them. So take a moment and you repeat after me. Today we'll practice explaining what equivalent fractions are. Your turn. Very nice. And we'll practice identifying them. Your turn. Great job. Okay, so we're going to jump into some of our vocabulary next. We have 4 different vocabulary words that I am going to go over today. The first one is just the word fraction. So by now, lesson 4, fraction should be a word that you're pretty familiar with. So tap your head if that word sounds familiar to you. Great. Now take a moment and think, what does the word fraction mean? What is a fraction? Think in your head, what is a fraction? When you have an idea, go ahead and show me thumbs up. All right. Now, if you're sitting near someone, turn and share with whoever's sitting near you what a fraction is. If you're sitting by yourself, then just say out loud, as though I can hear you, all the way from room 21, what a fraction is. Just go ahead and tell me, what is a fraction? Okay, so some of you probably said that a fraction shows part of a whole. Okay, so some of you probably said that a fraction shows part of a whole. All right, tap your head if you said that a fraction shows part of a whole. Great job. So I'm just going to underline those important words there, okay? And then to write a fraction, we have to write them in a really special way. So we would write a fraction just like this. We have a top number, a fraction line or fraction bar, and then a bottom number. And the top number is the part. The bottom number is the whole. So going back to that box of candy that Alton gave me, we talked about how in the package there were 12 pieces of candy altogether, okay? Then Hungry Hippo, Miss Garcia came along and she ate 6 of those 12 pieces. So she ate 6 out of 12 pieces of candy, okay? But then I told you that these numbers actually have even fancier names besides just part and whole. I explained to you that the top number, which describes part of the whole, is actually called a numerator. Everybody say numerator. Great job. And then I explained to you that the bottom number, in this case 12, which is the whole, and in this case there were 12 pieces in the whole package of candy. The whole number is actually called a denominator. Everybody say denominator. Great job. Okay, so vocabulary word 1, all right? Then I want to go over the next word, which I think I introduced to you yesterday, or you started to hear me say this word. The next word is partition. Tap your head if you recognize that word from yesterday's lesson, partition. Tap your head. All right, now everybody say the word partition. Everybody say the word partition. Sounds good. So the word partition has a chunk in it, a chunk that you'll recognize. It has the chunk part. So when we partition something, we're actually just breaking it down into smaller parts. So you can probably see how the word partition is related to fractions already. So I'm going to draw a square. I drew a whole square. None of this square is shaded, okay? If it were a cracker, for example, the whole thing is still intact. I haven't eaten any of it, haven't taken any bites. None of it has crumpled away, okay? Now, I'm going to partition it. I'm going to divide it into smaller parts. So I can do that in a number of ways. I can partition it into unequal shares, or I can partition it into equal shares. Usually when we're dealing with fractions, we're talking about equal shares or equal parts. So I'm going to divide it into 4 equal parts, and I'm not using a ruler or any measuring tool, so it's not going to be perfect, but it's close enough. So I partitioned this whole square, started as just one piece, into how many smaller parts? Can you count with me? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I took one whole square and I divided it or partitioned it into smaller parts. Okay. Now, we also talked about the word equivalent. Can everybody say equivalent? Nice job. Now, try to recall from yesterday. What does it mean for something to be equivalent? What does it mean for something to be equivalent? While you're thinking, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a couple of squares here. Okay. So did anybody think from yesterday, remember, what does the word equivalent mean? Okay, if you don't, I'll tell you. Equivalent just means that some things are equal. They're equal to each other. They're the same. So I have 2 squares here, and I'm going to partition the first square into 4 equal shares. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 equal shares. Now, I'm going to take this square, and I'm actually going to partition it into just 2 shares. And they're not exactly equal. That square looks a little bit wonky, but it's close enough. Okay, so I partitioned it into 2 shares. Now, I'm going to take a blue marker, and I'm going to shade in half of the first square, and I'm going to shade in half of the second square. And I want for you to think about, are they equivalent when I shade them in? So in other words, did I shade half of the first square and did I shade half of the second square? If the answer is yes, then that means that I have 2 equivalent squares, okay? They're both showing half of their squares shaded in, all right? Now we have one more vocabulary word, and it has to do with things being equivalent. It's not really a vocabulary word. It's really actually just a symbol. So you guys recognize this symbol. Tap your head if you recognize this symbol. Now go ahead and call out, what is the name of this symbol? What is the name of this symbol? If you said an equal sign, you're exactly correct. This is called an equal sign. Now, this is probably a symbol that looks familiar because it looks almost like an equal sign, except something about it is different. What is different? Can you go ahead and share out loud? What's different about this equal sign? You're probably noticing that this equal sign has a dash through it. Well, it has a dash through it because this equal sign actually means that something is not equal. So if I were describing these two squares, I would say that this square is equal to this square. If they were not shaded the same way, for example, if I shaded another share in the first rectangle, or sorry, the first square, all of a sudden you can see that the unshaded parts are not equal and the number of shaded parts is also unequal. So then I would come over to my equal sign and I would say, never mind, they're unequal. They're not equal, okay? So we're going to be using these today in math, all right? All right, so I'm going to model a couple of problems for you before you get started with your independent practice task today. So you guys are going to get a copy of a worksheet that looks just like this. It's called Equivalent Fractions. At the top, it has a spot for your name. So you're going to, as usual, begin with a worksheet by writing your name. And then on the right side, it also has a spot for the date. So today's date is actually March 26th, 2020. So you're going to write in the date too. At the top, it has a little blurb, so I'm going to read that to you. Equivalent is another word for equal to, or the same. Fractions that are equivalent are equal. They are different names for the same size parts of a whole or a group. Fractions that do not name the same size part are not equivalent. So here are the directions now. Shade the first shape to show the fraction. Then shade the second shape so that it is equivalent. Finish the math sentence by writing the fraction for the second shape. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to model number 1 and I'm going to model number 2 for you. That's funny. The number 2 is in this box. It looks like this is number 1 and number 2. I think that was a mistake. Okay, so the first circle, it is telling me to shade 1/2 of that. So I have some colored pencils here. I'm going to shade in 1/2. I'm really careful when I'm shading this in for math because I don't want to accidentally shade in part of the other one and then leave my teacher really confused about whether or not I meant to shade that or if I didn't mean to shade it. Was I just doing sloppy work? My teacher might not know. Okay, especially since we're doing this distance learning, it's important for you to make it really clear what is shaded and what is not. Because I can't just call you over to my desk and say, hey, can you explain to me what happened here? So I've shaded in 1/2, okay? Now, my goal is to shade the second shape to make it equivalent to the first. So even though this circle has 4 parts, it's been partitioned into 4, I can still shade in half, okay? So I'm going to shade in actually this same side, just so it looks really clear to you how they're similar. Okay, now I've shaded half, so do you agree or disagree that this circle, the first one, looks a lot like the second one? Agree or disagree? Hopefully you're saying that you agree. So now my job is to write in the fraction for the second shape. So the way that they got 1 out of 2 is they counted how many shares there were. So there's 1 and 2 parts all together. So they wrote the 2 at the bottom. Then they have the fraction bar in the middle, separating the numerator from the denominator. And then at the top, they're showing how much is shaded. So 1 part of the 2 parts is shaded. So they have 1 out of 2. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to do the same thing for the second circle. It's going to look a little bit different though. I know I always need my fraction bar So I'm going to add that in right away. But now I'm going to go through and I'm going to count. How many shares do I have all together? I have 1, 2, 3, 4 parts all together. So at the bottom, for my denominator, I write the number 4. And now I just count how many parts of my circle are shaded. I can see that one part is shaded and a second part is shaded. So 2 parts out of the 4 parts are shaded. So this means that 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Okay, so 1/2 is equal to 2/4. I can see that really clearly when I look at the picture, because even though they're partitioned into different number of parts, they're still equal. Okay, so I'm going to model number 2 for you. Number 2 is already partitioned just like number 1 was. The first fraction says 1 out of 3. So it's telling me to to shade 1 part out of the 3 parts. Now, it doesn't matter because it didn't tell me, didn't specify which part to shade, so I just get to choose. So I chose this top one on the left side. I could have chosen the one on the right side or the bottom share too. It doesn't matter. Okay, so shaded 1 out of 3 parts. Now I'm going to come over to my second circle, and this circle's got a lot more shares than the first one. So I'm just going to count though and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now that I've done that, actually, it's a little bit easier for me to see how I could correctly make this picture match this one. So if I'm going to start just with a little piece at the top, I'm thinking of it kind of like as a pizza. So if I shade one little slice of the pizza, okay, so I just look, does this look equal to you yet, or should I keep going? Looks like I should probably keep going. I'm going to just do 1 share at a time, so I can always shade in more if I need to, but it's a little bit harder to unshade. Not impossible, but a little bit harder. Oh, now does that look about right? Okay, I agree with you. So all I have to do now is I have to write my fraction. So I start by writing my fraction bar. I'm always going to need one of those, so I write it right away. And then I just write the total number of shares that were in this circle. I already counted, but I'll remind you. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts altogether, 6 slices of pizza. And then I shaded 2 of those parts. 1, 2. So the first fraction says that 1/3, 1 part out of 3 shares, is shaded. The second fraction says that there are 2 parts out of 6 whole shares shaded. So 1/3 is actually equal to 2/6. Okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to find these problems on, I'm going to put them in 2 places. I'm going to upload the worksheet to Google Classroom. So if you want to print off the worksheet and do it with crayons or colored pencils at home, you can print it off and do numbers 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 at home, and then snap a picture and post it on Seesaw. But I'll also post kind of a mini version. Actually, I'll post this exact version on Seesaw. So you can also just do it digitally on the Seesaw app or Seesaw website. Okay? I'll be checking your work on Seesaw later today. So good luck and have fun.